We started People+ai last August. And for a long time, people were saying, why aren't you doing anything in education? And frankly, we just didn't have the right team. A huge mistake sometimes is when you have good in-house engineers, but you don't have a good domain understanding. You can build a product, but it won't actually work. And then that's essentially our name, like people first and then AI. So in everything we build, we try to figure out what are really the problem statements on the ground. What are really the on-ground pain points? And from that lens, then build AI solutions to reduce frictions. I don't fundamentally believe that, AI will solve everything. Oftentimes people view AI as like the silver bullet that will save everything. And all this while we were struggling, and now suddenly AI is on the scene and everything will be solved. I don't think that to be true. What I do think is that AI will make things a lot faster. So if there were certain challenges that were simply on account of speed, where like we cannot deploy updated curriculum to the last mile government school, just because of the amount of levels that it will go from an NCERT in Delhi to every last mile school, it's hard. So I think the speed of that can now be improved with AI. And what we'll do today is we'll have one use case track where we'll talk about these things. But what I thought we'd do is I'll give a 5-minute introduction to People+ai and our work. Many of you we're meeting and speaking to for the very, very first time. And so I'll give a little bit of context and the agenda for today, and then we'll kick off. Today is not going to be a seminar. I really don't have much insight to give you. What we're hoping to do is to crowdsource information together. So we'll divide up into 3 subgroups focused on specific agendas and tracks. And those subgroups will be entirely participative. We'll have a moderator just so that, it remains organized. But what we want to do today is hear from you. And that's at least the context. So if you came here mainly to watch, sorry. But yeah, coming back to People+ai, one of the things we fundamentally, one of our main hypotheses when we started was that AI in India should be use case led. Typically with technology, there's always this huge paradox that we see. I was at a car exhibition in Mumbai a few months ago. And at that car exhibition, there were all these futuristic self-driving cars with airplane doors. And it was beyond like amazing. And the irony was that everyone who came over there, 90% of them came in a Maruti car with a Bluetooth speaker. And they were all amazed at, what was shown on the showcase. And then they went back in their Maruti car with a Bluetooth speaker, and some of them were automatic cars. And so that's a paradox. The technology we see on the shelf versus the technology that's actually deployed on field, there's a huge gap. And then one of the things that we believed is as we deploy AI at scale, it's really about the use cases. And most times there's a lot of talk of like, what is the potential of AR and VR in, public education? And while the scope is there, I just think it's a far pipeline. And in order to get there, there'll be many small use cases that really make that a reality. And what we're committed to doing is making India the AI use case capital of the world. So what that would mean is constantly experimenting and figuring out what works, what doesn't. For what does work, we then share it wider. For what doesn't work, we share the learnings for why it didn't work. And if someone has a better idea to tweak it and finally get it to work, we'd love that. But at least that way we're not reinventing the wheel. So that's our approach for AI. One of the things when people look at AI is that they often only consider the data, the compute and the models. And that's kind of like the core Venn diagram for AI. The things that you ignore most times is the talent in terms of the people who actually build it and design the solutions that work on field. I was just talking to Prateek and Tanmay that have deployed a math solution that's now gone to 3 lakh teachers. Oftentimes in the whole AI equation, you don't actually consider the talent of the people that have deployed it at scale and the use cases in terms of ideas that they had to come up with to deploy it. And those are the 2 things that we're really looking to champion. We do 4 things primarily. One is use cases. We're entirely volunteer-led community. What that means is that we have about 8 staff members that are kind of facilitators, but then we actually have about 180 volunteers that work with us every week to test out these ideas and figure out what use cases work, what use cases don't work, and then build a prototype for it. So that's our big vertical. We do use cases. But along with scaling AI, at some point you hit a a glass ceiling, and that glass ceiling is usually your infrastructure capabilities. And when I say infrastructure for AI, it's usually the availability of computing power, and the second thing is your availability of data sets. Like most of you who've built AI in education, you'd have a very, very good model in English. The moment you go to Kannada, Hindi, any other language, you realize the availability of data sets in those languages are limited. And until you can expand the scope of digitized records in those languages, you just can't get solutions to work. And so that's what we call as infrastructural challenges, where irrespective of the use case, the idea might be good, but the infrastructure is just not there to support those ideas. And so that's a challenge that we're working on. We're doing two things in infrastructure currently. One is on the computing side, and the other is, like I said, on this data side, specifically for Indian languages. How do you build robust open source data sets for Indian languages so that you can then deploy several use cases? The other two things that we do is more on the people front, which is largely we build communities together. If you're building AI in India, it's just very hard to build alone. Reason being is that unlike, I'd say, AI startups more than any other, when you fail, the losses are high. Because typically to build a POC, it will probably cost you 5-7 lakhs maybe. Then to deploy it to your first 1,000-2,000 customers will cost you another pipeline of money, and only after that point will you begin to realize whether your idea is working or not working and whether it's viable. And so by that runway sometimes is very hard for people to experiment with. And usually why it's expensive is because API costs are expensive if you build on top of a GPT model, or computing costs are very, very expensive in terms of cloud hosting and things like that. The challenge is, while there's a lot of ideas in the AI space, it's also a higher risk game. Like if you actually have to step out as an entrepreneur and build AI in education, you need a decently large pocket, for lack of a better word, or you need to have like a funding pipeline from the get-go. And those are tough things to have right from the beginning. And so what we try to do over here is create a community where people can come with an idea and test it out in a relatively realistic market state. So that means we'll find partners that will deploy it, test it out, see if the idea works, and you can do that entirely free of cost. So at least once you know it works, then you can figure out like the commercial viability for it. So that's what we do in our community. And then finally, for good ideas, we cheerlead it. We have lots and lots of partners that work on various AI use cases. And what we've set up to do is build stories around it. So we have several podcasts, videos. As you can see, we have a tech team that's very, very committed to documenting every single thing we do, so that when we have meetings like this, we can then share it with a wider audience and people benefit from that content. It's funny because we actually started as a fellowship. I feel like when people are excited about an idea but not sure what to do, they launch a fellowship. And yeah, true, right? Yeah, so we started as a fellowship. So at that time, we're housed under the Accept Foundation, and AI, ChatGPT, went public, and everyone started talking about AI. It was like the household conversation. And prior to that, a lot of our team was focused on building digital public infrastructure. So those are projects like Aadhaar, UPI. Technology at scale was kind of the lens with which we worked. But it was, I'd say, absent of AI. Probably the only solution that was AI enabled is DigiYatra, that many of you know, that runs on facial recognition. But what we found is that there's huge viability to build then AI at scale. So how do you take the principles of population scale enablement with now this new technology? And that's how we launched People+ai. It started as a fellowship last August. The community aspect, honestly, was it was a push factor. It's not something we planned for. For lack of, in full disclosure, we just got many LinkedIn messages saying, hey, I really like the vision and the work that's being done. I can't join as a fellow, but can you figure out a way that we can collaborate? And we got 5, and then 10, and then 100, and then 200 messages later, we said, we really need to channel this energy in a meaningful way. And so we launched what's called as a community piece. It started off as a WhatsApp group that now has 800 members on it. It's a crowd. But then we channeled it even further to putting out our projects publicly and asking people, if you have 3-5 hours a week, come help us build these prototypes. And then those people in fact became the champions of most of the ideas. So we started off with probably 4 or 5 use case ideas, like I mentioned. Now we have about 25 use cases that are working in parallel because we have so many volunteers that are working 3-4 hours a week. Garvit and Atarf have been volunteering with us for a long time in developing these ideas together. The end state of this is, I often say, it's kind of like a recipe book that we're publishing. The principles of a good recipe book is that it has all the ingredients and all the steps to build this recipe, and like a total dummy can come, and if they execute it to the T, they will have a good dish by the end of it. So that's what we're attempting to build for AI use cases. Essentially, the recipe book for if you want to deploy AI across various domains. We'll begin to publish those, and what that'll do is that'll begin to democratize the ability to build AI solutions. We do this as a not-for-profit. So the hope is that we partner with several for-profit companies and NGOs that will then, actually deploy this to end customers, with our focus being, can we work with a community in championing and adopting these solutions further? So impact for us, in a sense, looks like we build prototypes that then get adopted by thousands of companies who then reach the millions and billions of people. We're not often building, solutions with the People+ai logo, and this is the People+ai app that is going to be nationwide. What we build is prototypes that we make open source and then work with actual people on the field to deploy. One of the things that we did in the month of July was publish this thing called the People+ai wiki, which essentially is a thesis of why we do what we do in terms of every area. So like I said, across the data piece in terms of models, in terms of enabling compute, Indian startups, the talent ecosystem, use cases in terms of development areas, we've published like a set of priorities as well as our learnings from those spaces, which we've put out in public. You can find this on our website. It's available to all. With the idea of, one, it's a priority statement for us, but it also allows people to come and give us feedback. And usually when someone comes and gives us feedback, we say, okay, let's work together in incorporating the feedback and making it better. And so that way, in the spirit of, being truly open source, we've published all of our projects and all of our learnings into what we call as a wiki, where people can come and just visit and contribute to the work. It's a lot to read, but usually what people do is that they go to the area of interest and then they just engage with it's like a Wikipedia. You don't read all of Wikipedia, you just search and find what's relevant to you and go through the funnel. So along with that, we have our projects publicly listed. So we have projects across various domains. Say, for example, we have 2-3 projects in the climate space. We have few projects that are to do with literacy. So how do you fill a form if you really struggle with literacy? Can you take a photograph and have it pre-filled for you? We do some things in urban governance. Jan Ki Baat, in many ways, a paradigm shift for how do you listen at scale. We're doing one project called Sunva in terms of social accessibility. Mainly, I'll tell the story here. We had an engineer who was a volunteer that was 90% deaf in the spectrum of deafness. And he said that, most of my friends who are also deaf don't know Indian Sign Language. If you are speaking to them, they're often just trying to read your lips. And I found that a very fascinating thing. So we said, why don't we build a speech-to-text solution so that if you're sitting in a classroom where everyone's speaking, you'd be able to get the real-time captions on your phone and be able to keep up. And same for, say, a person who is deaf in a workplace is sitting at a meeting and everyone else in the room is able to speak and speaking across each other. At least now you're somewhat leveling the playing field where now they can keep up with the conversation, and we're building a solution where they can respond back real time. A lot of it can be done with just, text-to-speech, speech-to-text solutions. The main one that we're actually focusing on today is the EduAI track. So we have several domains that we work in. Today's agenda is education. Yeah, so this is what we want to do today. In the spirit of not reinventing the wheel, how do we share learnings of what's happening with education, what's happening with AI in education? So 2 main questions. What are the viable use cases that should be explored? For some cases, it'll be those that are already being explored by certain organizations. And some of them are viable use cases, but no one's working on it yet. And so on, what we're going to do is make a large board where people are just going to put stickies across various domains, segments like teacher-facing, student-facing, self-learning, classroom learning, academic-related, admin-related for, teacher productivity, things like that, where we'll just begin to list out a use case repository. It's going to be like a brainstorming idea session. And if we will write out the basic idea of the use case, And if we know organizations work in that space, we can write out the name of that organization and stick it there. For those of you who are entrepreneurs in the room, go steal some of those ideas and build it. If it works, great. Let us know if it works, and we'll publish those learnings. And the second most critical piece is how do you make learnings publicly available? What we hope to do is ideally at the end of this publish an article that'll go somewhat like we spoke to 15 organizations in the working for AI in education, and these are the insights they gave us, and share it with the wider community. We have about 45 institutional partners, and we're hoping to get more in the education space post this. And what we do is we'll share these learnings with them further and further. And this is our first exercise of it. We're hoping by the end of 1 year it'll likely be a pretty solid knowledge repository where if someone goes here, they really won't have to reinvent the wheel when it comes to building technology for India. Finally, the third agenda item is that we've recently published an education thesis. This is largely for people within our team. Some of us, Naima specifically, had worked at Teach for India for a long time. I worked in the education space as well, but primarily on skilling. So we kind of just put our minds together and said, this is like our point of view of AI and education. It might be total rubbish, or it might be good. Give us your feedback. So let's have an honest conversation on whether we're on point or totally missing the point. And hopefully in a constructive sense where we can figure out how do we now make it better. Because the hope is within the next 2-3 months, we'll actually have a working prototype for some of those ideas that we'll then share publicly. So that's the agenda for today. What we'll do is we'll divide the room up. Like I just took the liberty to go on the registration sheet and move names just on your LinkedIn profile search. So it's not, I don't deeply know you. So it's just a high level guess. If you feel you'd be better in another room, feel free to switch. It's not a hard and fast thing. We're just trying to balance out enough people on the room. For those online, I'm really sorry, but just because of the challenges of being hybrid, you'll be on the thesis track. But if you're here in person, then you're more privileged. So we'll have 3 subgroups today. One is the learnings group. The other would be the use case group that'll be working on the brainstorming piece. And the third one will be the thesis group. I've put some names and along with that, questions to answer. So what we'll do today is kind of split up. We have a bunch of conference rooms available in the office. Once you get to your group, feel free to introduce yourself, make a friend, and then we'll jump into the agenda. And post this, we'll come back and share the joint learnings. So that's the agenda for today. Any questions before we now disperse? Sure. Yeah. So at a high level, and Harsh will be moderating the learnings group, what are the insights and challenges for building AI in India? What types of outcomes are realistic to expect? Many times when you run like an NGO solution where it's like human interventions of training the teacher in the classroom, you then do an outcome mapping for if with this intervention, what are the outcomes expected, short term, long term, and then your eventual impact. Similarly, when you deploy an AI solution, how do you really measure success beyond we just have 1 million active users? Because the challenge is because AI is so expensive to deploy at scale, in order to not just get revenue but also attract funding, you'll have to be able to show some level of how you've shifted the needle, and usage is not usually deep enough. So being able to figure out what metrics really matter when it comes to AI solutions in education, and how do you build measurement frameworks to track that. And the good thing is, as you gather that data, you can then feed it back into your model and it'll become all that more intelligent. So those are the 2 things we'll be discussing in the learnings group, which is going to be upstairs. Right? Follow Harsh and real quick, if you want to take a photograph of the screen, this is my LinkedIn search recommended version of this group. But like I said, if you need to switch rooms, you feel you're better in another room, totally fine. Just so that we don't spend too much time in categorizing right here. The first group is the learnings group. The use case group will be right here on the ground floor outside. There are 2 large whiteboards, and it's just going to be a fun sticky note exercise where across various segments and categories, you can do online research. If top of your head feel free to populate that board as best as you can. What we'll do is we'll then convert it to a digital sheet where that will be publicly available, where we'll say these are the first round of 50 sourced use case ideas, and we'll do a little bit of vetting for that just before we share it wider, and we'll continue to populate that, and hopefully by the end of 6 months we'll have 100 really good ideas of AI solutions in education. So that's a use case group. And then the third group, there's going to be a little bit more of a deep dive. We have an education domain thesis, and we want critical thinkers to rip it apart and give us honest feedback in terms of what we're probably blindsided towards and how we can make it better. So it'll be a constructive approach, but in some ways it'll be saying, okay, you haven't considered these things, probably consider the viability of this, and Naima will be facilitating that. Ready to disperse? All good? There'll be coffee, tea, there's a fridge outside, feel free to grab we have a bunch of Diet Cokes and things to keep you caffeinated. Yes, so real quick before you leave, everyone working on use case is right here on the ground floor. You'll see 2 large whiteboards. For everyone on the learnings group, follow Harsh in the green shirt. You're going to go upstairs, and the thesis group will stay right here. Yeah. Gone back? Great. I don't know, 45 minutes was sufficient, to be honest. Maybe next time we'll do longer. Or in fact, maybe next time we'll do more focused. Like education in and of itself is too wide. As the first time, it's a good starting point, but potentially as we continue to organize these sessions, we'll do more and more focus based on sometimes just student learning, sometimes just teacher face. Here's what we want to do now, share learnings. So each group came up with a series of insights. We have quite a impressive use case board. Let's do this. Let's try and keep the presentation time to a minimum so that we can then engage with questions for the group. Just so that then, people from the other groups can meaningfully ask questions. Great. Use case group, you want to go first?
So our group was given the task of exploring use cases of AI in education. Particularly 3 questions we were answering. What are the most high impact use cases? What are the areas being ignored? What was the third question? Because I don't know. I think it's currently solving for. Yeah, which area we are currently solving for. So I think our team came up with a lot of good ideas. I'll go it the way we have divided it. In a student-centric one, the one thing we realize a lot of personalized learning. Like AI is the scope of a lot of personalized learning because each student has unique needs, unique learning styles, and particularly in their vernacular languages. So some of the ideas we discussed was personalized feedback, giving them mock question paper creation as per them using AI.
The primary see all the topics that are there is more like student centric, like you have teacher centric, and you have admin related things that can be done through AI, and you also have like mostly like academic related, self study and classroom study. And I think most of it kind of cut through the borders where you are actually trying to solve for a persona using AI. And I think all of us are more in terms of aligned towards what exactly you're trying to solve. But the biggest question is, I think even like what you had pointed out, like, are we actually trying to solve this use case knowing that this use case exists? Or are we just trying to throw AI around just because some fancy tool that we got right now? How do we really validate if the use case really actually makes sense? So I think that was one of the broader questions that we had. Apart from that, I think it's a lot to cover in 5 minutes. So I'll just try to go the gist of what we're trying to do. Like mostly in your teacher-centric, it's more in terms of how do we help teachers to either plan their curriculum or plan their classes, or how do we adapt and teach to every single student, and also give a coach to them or train the teachers get better in both urban and rural areas. Like mostly academic related, more in terms of what exactly do we want to learn, and can it make it more visual, can it be more than just being textual based. And admin related is more to do with like automating the work. That's why we don't know really if the use case actually exists. Then your classroom study, I think we got very less because cutting through all the borders. We're trying to cover students and teachers as well. The last self study, I think this is where most of us spoke about. It's more about what exactly the students going to learn. Can it be more adaptive? Can it be more competitive based? Can it be more different or personalized for every student? But yeah, primarily this is what we're kind of discussing.
two interesting ideas which also came up was teacher preparedness. Like, can we have AI to check, evaluate how teachers are doing our post training? So one thing is that in India, a lot of teachers are trained, but there are no evaluation after that, how well they are teaching, the pedagogy part. Can we have AI do that rather than the current manual process, which is very resource intensive? So yeah, that was one thing. Second was, can we use AI to teach in real time? Like, if a student is watching a video, AI can generate some questions, or if they are making some error, the AI can tell, oh, you are making an error, do this in this manner. So in real time learning, because shorter feedback loops and a larger learning process. So can we have AI in that space?
So I just like had a general query. The way you like bucketed these ideas, I think you were going for stakeholders and key stakeholders and stuff like that. So I was just wondering, like, why not go for parents? Or like, for example, parents also play a key role in educating children.
Yeah, I think employers are also not showing up here.
Sorry?
I feel like parents and employers, like if you really think about learning as a means to career, right? That's
Probably I think it was structured like that. Maybe.
Actually, that's a good insight because I think a lot of this is B2C. When there's a lot of B2B use cases.
So for one idea was AI-powered career counseling. It's not like someone says industry leaders can come and they can like suggest what are the skills they want, and that matching can happen. And one of the ideas was also AI can draw the talent of the student in the early stages itself. But parents, we didn't know. Yeah, that maybe.
I see this very the lens that has been here is a very school-centric lens. Public education system is quite different, and I think at large, again, the difference between developed countries, developed countries already attain a good public education system. People would want to admit into public education system. Country like India, public education system is at a place where people aspire for private education system, which cannot go at scale. So from a public education lens, I feel like admin related I see there, but I mean one leadership, then parents, but also community at large, because in public education system, community, the SMCs, because that school management committees that are a part of the entire system there is a very key stakeholder. So those I think need to come up and show up in the use cases.
We did discuss like how we can, like in the current edtech sector, it's mostly higher education. Like even the applications we are building with without AI, they are in higher education because profit is there. But on the mass education level, what you can do? So exactly, that was a question we put, but we didn't discuss it.
Sounds good. What I'm hoping for is people raise good points on where we didn't include buckets. So if you have any suggestions, feel free to write it to us. Because then when we have the final repository list, we'll try to include, make it a lot more robust.
Alright, though I'm speaking about this, I wasn't the major group of people contributing. Just a little disclaimer. I was mostly trying to capture the learnings here. Essentially, this is where we started, is where all the participants are, like where their major work is. So we had a lot of participants who work in students, few with teachers, one with leadership, few with parents, and more stakeholders that I have not yet included. Information may be inaccurate, please correct me. Okay? Alright, so I think when I was putting down the learnings and challenges, one thing I realized is learnings are the challenges. So I'll just go through them very quickly. If anyone wants to have any questions on additional details, please reach out to the people in the group. So the first learning is again target B2B over B2C. Again, why? Please ask the people in the group. I can't recall the reason, but I think someone else said that.
business models are
Better to make more money there.
Yeah.
Okay. And again, when you make AI, make it simple, make it intuitive. And then when it comes to teachers, they like to retain their creative decision making, and they would prefer if the repetitive tasks were automated. We are actually going opposite direction nowadays. And very interesting thing is bot user architects based on the person using the bots. There are two types. One is the struggler who will give up, and then the other who will take whatever information they can and problem solve. So just in case you guys are creating bots, something to keep in mind.
Reach out to Varun if you want to know.
Yes, thank you, Harsh. Please type it more there. Guardrails for AI. I think everyone sees the need for guardrails. And the last one is AI can simplify actions, and that actually leads to the usability of whatever products. And so, for example, if you make something easier to do, people are more likely to adopt your solution. So instead of writing a full report or a message, if I just record it and AI does the rest, AI can help break down tasks. If anyone or if you government tools or something, anything like even how do I start People+ai, it will give you like a breakdown of every single thing you need to do. David, please go on. Okay, AI to personalized notification. This is more from like a marketing perspective. Is if say nowadays Swiggy, if you're an old person during lunchtime, they will target like specific food for you. You can do something like that in education in the app. Visuals drive higher learning. I think that has been established, but something to note. And when it comes to challenges, I think largely you can see that the data is like a big challenge for the Indian market. So we have data privacy, we have data accuracy, and something very interesting that kept coming up is AI is not able to detect when learning is complete. So that is one of the current challenges. And then when it comes to data training, obviously the language barrier is there. But there's also like image as data. Someone might share that a lot of good data is in form of images, but AI is not able to extract it as effectively. It favors text. Then data availability in terms of Indian faces, Indian languages, and it eventually impacts relatability or contextualizing any piece of information. Then we have user expectation mismatches. Maybe they don't trust it, maybe they expect the solution to be complete when they get it. So something to keep in mind when you're developing it. And then students, you have multiple aspects. One is engagement, which we found a better word for making it addictive is habituation. And then basically, how do we get students to persevere and how do we incentivize them? Those are one of the few biggest challenges right now, especially when it comes to, I think, self-driven learning. Inclusion and accessibility is essentially, I don't know, you have different minorities depending on neurodivergence to various handicap. So how do you make the same amount of learning and the formats accessible to them? Very simple example is on like websites, you have like text that is made bigger for people who can't read small text. That's basic example of accessibility. Then identify student starting point, and this comes in like personalization and like knowledge maps of any subject. Is how do you identify where a student is in the knowledge piece, and how do you get them to wherever you want them to go. Real versus fake. I can't recall why I put that down, but it has to do with intellectual property.
Like creating avatars, creating content.
Yes. Okay. Sorry, say more. I didn't.
So like if you want, let's say Amitabh Bachchan to deliver your lesson in math,
Right.
you can create that.
Yeah.
But what is real and what's fake?
So something to watch out for. Then, in terms of using Indian textbooks to like train AI, one of the challenges someone brought up is CBSE, state, all of them differ, layouts, the style of questioning, all of that, and so that becomes, I think, a challenge to standardization. Yeah. Okay. And then also, right now, text is like the bigger thing for AI. It's like more text-based. There are very little audio and visual solutions for AI. So something for you guys to think about, the market fit there. And just other tidbits around the ecosystem itself is that parents, they have a lot of concerns with the use of technology and AI, but also there's one like problem to solve is that they don't want to leave their kids alone to do other work, but they don't want to feel guilty about it. So you can find like an AI way to engage students, great. And then also, always expect the final solution, so something to keep in mind as you build and iterate. Couple of graphs I just sketched was just interesting. So one is tech over time is that students, they pick up tech quicker than teachers. Teachers take a longer time to pick up tech, so something to keep in mind. There's also a big chasm between developing a solution and scaling it. We didn't get to go what is exactly in the chasm, how do you overcome it, but maybe you guys can help us figure that out. And then also in terms of students and technology, their desires are high, but for the majority of them they can't really access it because of cost, infrastructure, all of that. And a few questions that came up was how can we capture and spread stories and best practices, especially within schools, using AI? How do you measure learning? And how do you show what one does not know? Yes. If you have questions, please redirect them to others. I will go sit down now. Thank you.
Questions for the whole group?
I was wondering about the chasm part. Is it more that the pilot phase is invariably longer than is that what it is, or is it really a gap?
So I just put it there because in entrepreneurship you have you have a chasm between scaling it up. You have the initial people who adopt it, but then generally there's culture or politics or something is there in between.
I mean, that is inherent in the nature of innovation also, right? Like you start with 100 ideas, maybe two.
Okay. So then, yeah, I mean, how is it different in the context?
But with AI, there are specific reasons for like computational power, adoption, like that.
One of the huge challenges for scaling is language, because if your early adopters are urban schools that are English medium, everything works great. You now have the exact same concept being taught in Marathi in a Marathi medium school, and the level of hallucinations and gaps in the knowledge will be very high. That will immediately be like a failure on arrival. And until you have sufficient language across those data sets, you can only scale to an English-speaking population of India, and where there are only English medium schools, and that will always be limited. So that's one example, but there are several gaps that occur.
Have you come across people who are addressing that specific problem?
There's an organization called AI for Bharat that are working to build the largest data set. The real thing that it's not solving for is fine-tuning your model. Because say if they collect a lot of local language data for fintech, for banking related, financial related questions, you'll have a database that is sufficient enough, but you cannot train it for an education bot. So you'll have sufficient enough content in other languages, but it won't serve the purpose for your use case. So the challenge becomes is not just digitized data sets, but as per category to have sufficiently digitized data sets is the harder part. Because if you're deploying a solution in healthcare, the conversations had over there are very different from education, which are very different from financial services like loan applications. And so your data sets will always be limited. Yeah.
Are you familiar with Jugalbandi?
Yeah.
So they also use this multilingual thing. The last time we had a conversation, they were saying it doesn't need to be fine-tuned. They use, I'm not very sure.
They use Bhashani. Yeah.
So are they translating? At the end, are they translating?
But they are. It's a different use case. Since they are doing grievance. Like which.
So the thing with grievance redressal is that all customer care calls are usually recorded. So you have transcriptions of those, and so there's available data sources. But for certain use cases, like say a patient-doctor interaction, oftentimes those are never recorded. And so if you want to build an AI bot in healthcare, it's going to be very hard to collect the data in the first place.
We were talking about this in the placement context.
I think the very unsexy thing in AI is that your AI is only as good as your data. And the fancy bots, it's nice for a prototype, but like I said, there's always that technology paradox, where the final thing that works on the ground is usually a mass data collection, where you're just going with a microphone and recording that data for your models to genuinely work. And another distinction I want to put on this board is that sometimes pain points are not necessarily use cases. Say, for example, there were some people in the room that mentioned that how do you measure between completion and learning? It's the same problem as how do you measure between memorizing and actually learning. And so it's possible that I just memorize, an hour before the exam. I try and cram as much as possible. I go there, just throw it out on the paper, and then I've forgotten everything 2 days later. Similar, problem that is run into. And so sometimes we'll be chasing rabbit holes to try and solve a pain point that is not necessarily an AI use case. It's a real problem on the ground, no doubt. I just don't know if all of it will be solved with AI. Yeah. So I think the real prioritization is to see whether your pain point is technologically viable, because there'll always be a certain series of pain points that will exist and might not be solved for with AI. Yeah, I mean, and that's why we are in business, for lack of a better word.
So I think it's more important to classify that school, if it is school education, then primary school, middle school, and higher education is potentially a problem statement there, where viability is the most difficult.
Sure.
And then we split it up with language or subject specific approach one by one.
I mean, and yeah, some of the insights that we'll genuinely try and gather together is what is really viable, what makes for viability, because there'll be several pain points that everyone can relate to, and so it's easy to gather a crowd around pain points. But to figure out from those pain points, these will genuinely be viable use cases is is an art and not a science, sadly. When we have sessions like this, I just go around the room and ask how many of you have ever paid for a mobile application? And you have, yeah, but you'd be like the minority because say I have a 50,000 rupee iPhone but 0 paid apps on my iPhone. So I'll pay for the phone, but I won't pay for the software. And so there's certain challenges that are just behavioral in the Indian market, which we have to account for. But I want to leave the last 5-7 minutes for the thesis group.
Thanks. I mean, we're talking about how people won't pay for time, but I guess the education thesis to some extent is actually going towards saving time for school leaders. So we were discussing in our group, where it was me in person and everybody else online, and which is why I'm a Spock right now. But these folks at People+ai have put down a document where they're going into some of the use cases and a theory of change, which is speaking about AI interventions built to decrease operational overhead on teachers. And the assumption is that that would lead further to like save up some time for them to focus on the student outcomes and maybe even facilitate even development of pedagogical skills and other TLMs that they can bring into the classroom. So some sort of upskilling, training, coaching that can also be facilitated through AI for the teachers. And we just spent some time going through the whole document and seeing the sort of gaps that we could see from our experiences from the field and also in our own context. So some of the points which came out was the solution itself was focusing a little more towards teachers, but how do you actually make it an integrated one that is both teacher and student facing, even though indirectly it is going to affect student outcomes, but something to think about. Something the folks here have spoken about is wanting to work with teachers, since a lot of players in the domain are working with students as well. So trying to cover all bases through that. One thing that came out very clearly has been the guarantee of actually, what if the time gets freed up from doing admin work for a teacher, but would they actually spend that time in the same salary that they're being paid to actually work towards improving the student outcomes or upskilling in any manner? Like, what is the incentive that someone would have to learn a new tool like an AI-enabled tool to actually, lead towards like these everyday changes? And another thing was the doc does not touch upon how the learners would be using or accessing it, again coming towards the student outcomes and what the role and the touch points for a student would be in this process. The teacher's willingness and comfort with using AI tools will also vary, and that was something we were addressing in terms of the larger geographic and tech savviness that is very diverse in India, especially at this point in time when there are newer and newer tools being introduced on an everyday basis. There are some states which actually have like 5 applications from an admin perspective. So when is too much technology a thing right now? What incentive again does a teacher have to spend time and learn the new tool, which is an extra tool for the same salary? And there is not really much research, at least as of now, that productivity will be enhanced by freeing up that time. And what sort of measurable indicators could be brought in for tracking the actual achievement of the outcomes, and if making space for productivity will actually happen. And one sort of persona which is not being covered that someone brought up is private tutors and coaching centers and also teachers who are employed in such spaces, like in alternative spaces, and also the employers of these larger like organizations. Again, sort of bringing back the point about the different state boards and CBSE and stuff, academic outcomes can obviously differ across boards, and so bringing in a sense of standardization even for bringing in indicators for learning outcomes would be hard. So there needs to be an alignment with the boards as well. Overall, that is some of the insights we've had. But I feel like this would be something that everyone can benefit with. It's an open document that is free for commenting as well. I think Naima can share the link perhaps.
So post this, along with the thesis track, we'll publish on our public pages the insights from the learnings group as well as the use cases. So we'll digitize a lot of this content and make it publicly available. And every few weeks we'll continue to add and make it richer. Right now it's empty, so next week it will be full.
So you mentioned a couple of times around what is the incentive for teachers. So was it like an open-ended question, or did you guys discuss and figure out are there any incentives in practice currently?
No, it was more of a prompt because we were reviewing the document itself and the things that it might not be addressing at this point in time. So motivation, like since these folks are still in the phase of like figuring out some of the assumptions and some of the different aspects that they'll be taking to user research as well. So what are some of the ways that they can actually supplement that and bring in some sort of like knowledge towards that? So no, we didn't really discuss what would be the incentives themselves, but someone did speak from their own experience saying that, okay, what would be the incentive for an individual to want to actually learn a new tool? I feel like that's a pretty valid question to ask in terms of any emerging technology, right?
Just a backstory on why we picked this as a use case for our thesis. We did a high-level secondary search, which was a Google search.
We found that there are 117,000 government schools in India that only have one teacher. So you have one teacher that runs the whole show for the entire school. The PE, they do the PE, they do the math, science, everything. And so what we're essentially, at least as a first level prototype, trying to solve for those schools. How do you free up their time so that they can prioritize in classroom learning as compared to, administrative overload tasks? So that's at a very, very high level our problem statement, and we're going from there. We're still very early in the journey, but that was the problem that was thrown at us, and hence we came up with this thesis. Eventually, at some point down the road, we'll look for partners that also work in the teacher space if they'd want to. On the tech side, we actually have a strong enough tech team that's building it, but we'd actually look for domain partners that are working with teachers, because we don't directly work with teachers. So that's a challenge. I wanted to let everyone know about next steps. Oftentimes, this will be a one-time event where you go and hopefully you got something useful out of this 2 hours. But for some of you will want next steps to engage further. So I'll give a few options for the group, and you can feel free to take what you like. What we are committed to do as a education-focused subgroup is we want to publish learnings and insights. So we'll consistently have a team that is talking to organizations all the time and sharing these learnings, insights in the forms of articles, repositories, Excel sheets with lots of ideas, and videos, reports, whatever is needed. But the second thing we want to do is be able to connect individuals working together. So there's sometimes organizations that have a product, and there might be an NGO that is looking to test a product, and they just don't know that each other exists. And so what we're hoping to do is to be able to be kind of like a matchmaking platform, not in the dating sense of the word, but to be able to connect solution providers and deployers together, as well as people who have ideas and don't have anyone to work on it with. It's very, very hard to work on an idea alone. Let's just be honest. So if you have an idea that you feel is high potential and you have absolutely no one to work with, you can consider to bring it to this community, and you'll find 10 other people to work on it with you. And that's what we hope to do. So those are a few things. Along with that, there'll be a few people that want to engage deeply. So I'll give some options for those who would like that. We're looking for people who would want to be co-publishers with us. So people that would actually want to document this work and publish it with your name on it in actual thought pieces, articles, and publications that thousands of people will go on to read. These are all voluntary positions, sadly, but yeah, if someone is interested in writing and documenting and sharing learning widely, or if you'd also want to be one of our sparks in engaging with external partners and running these interviews, if you like networking and that's your kind of a thing, we invite you to join. Second are those who are like in the startup building phase and you want to validate your ideas. This is a great place to do that, because we have a sufficient enough reach where you can come bring your demos, prototypes, we can share it wider, and you'll get hopefully valuable feedback on it. So feel free to leverage our community to do this. Every 2 months or so, we'll organize sessions like this. We have your email, so you'll get the next invite as well. And if you want to bring a friend next time, we don't have the largest room, sadly. If any of you have offices that are larger and can hold more than 25 people, that way, we can widen the pool a little bit. Quest, yeah. So ask Akash and let me know. And
I don't have to ask him.
Okay, great. So we'll tell Akash and ask Kushbu or whoever else. The hope is that we'll build a little bit of momentum through this community. It doesn't only have to be hosted here. We're more than happy to collaborate with this effort. That being said, we're officially done. Thanks for coming. We have a lot of food and snacks outside. Make a friend before you go.